And you're on.
Good afternoon, everyone. And my name is Morgan March, and I'm a theater teacher and an educational role player and a designer of educational role plays. And today I'm going to talk about a game or a participatory drama that we created in 2012 called 2027, which is hence the name of this program spot. I'm going to ask you if you have any questions to hold on to them, write them down, and in the end I will answer questions depending on time. But I'm probably not going to be able to answer questions throughout, so keep holding on to them, and I'll hope to have enough time to answer your questions. Okay, let's see where we can take this. So first we're going to talk a little bit about what a LARP, or a live action role-playing game, is, and participatory drama, what it is. And then I'll do a little bit of a run through of the game, the 2027 game we did. And then after that, I'm going to talk a little bit about techniques and methods to create these things and things to think about before we dive in and see if there's anyone who have any good ideas of things they want to do themselves. So that is the general overview of what we'll do today. First, EduLARP, or educational live action role-playing games. So it's in the name, it's role-playing. You play roles, your characters, you're not yourself. It's live action, you're up on your feet and doing it in a world that is created for you, rather than say do it online in a computer game or verbally by talking to each other, telling stories. It's an on your feet kind of a deal. It's a game with citation marks here, because quotation marks here, because a lot of times there is rules that are game-like, but sometimes they're not, and it's all drama. But we refer to them as games because it comes out of a role-playing game tradition. And it's educational. You learn things through it. Now, all LARPs, live-action role-playing games, all LARPs are naturally in themselves multi-story events. That means it's not just the one central event we're listening to, but everybody's playing a character that has their own central drama, which means it's many stories that are happening at once, rather than one big one. And that doesn't mean there can't be a central dramaturgy of some sort. There can be a story that most, if not all, story arcs relate to, but there is definitely an individual dramaturgy for each character, and potentially for each group, and then for each bigger grouping, and then potentially for the whole event as a whole. So that is a different way of thinking around theater or drama than usually on a stage or in a movie, where we're following maybe several different stories, but we're following one at a time that then coalesce into a thing. Whereas this is going to be all the stories at the same time happening, individually experienced by everybody who is in it. Now, because we say role play also, it's important to remember that it's usually improvised, that you don't learn lines and stuff. It is a form of drama where you don't have an audience and you don't have lines usually. Sometimes there is some segments that are scripted, but most often it's not scripted. So it's all improvised. And this ends up meaning that we don't know where this drama is going to go when we design them, and we have to design them for autonomy and participation in mind, which is a different way of thinking around this. I am also, I just wanted to say, I'm going to give you these slides as a PDF, so you don't have to write down everything that it says here if you're a notes-taking kind of person. You can get this afterwards. So Nordic LARP. LARP exists all over the world, but there's a specific kind of LARP that comes out of the Nordic countries, like me. I'm from Sweden originally. They are now created all over the world and played all over the world, but it is a tradition that came out of the Nordic countries. And that tradition holds a few tenets that are important and different from a lot of other LARP cultures. When people think about LARP, particularly in America, they think about people dressing up in capes and hitting each other with rubber swords in the park a lot of the time. Now that happens in the Nordic countries too, but it also has a more artistic background or development, where the focus is more on the artistic vision and not just play and entertainment, although play and entertainment is usually part of it too. So the first one that is really important is the immersion. To go into a character deeply and experience and live as the character. That means we have a 360-degree scenography usually. That means the set we're on is a real place rather than an imagined place. We would build a whole village of medieval houses to do a fantasy game, or we will be in a castle, or we will be in a refugee camp for real to pretend to be refugees, or we will be remake a battle cruiser into a starship and play sci-fi in space. So there'll be like, we will actually have costumes that are historically correct from the Second World War or whatever it is. So we try to have a 360-degree illusion, and usually there's a one-to-one time too, that like 1 minute in playtime is 1 minute in the character time. That can also shift sometimes, but and usually we are also very, very hardcore on being in character, that you don't break character and become yourself and have conversations that are not about the story or the game world or where you're at as that person you're playing. Another one is collaboration. So a lot of LARP cultures have a competition at their centers. People are basically fighting each other in different ways, trying to win. Whereas in Nordic countries, it's more the collaboration about telling the story. Not that competition don't exist, but there's much more focus on the story or the immersion into the character and the world, which means we have a concept that is playing to lose. It means I play to make the best story, even if that means my character loses. Because I don't need to win as a character to win as a player. My enjoyment in losing is my win, so to speak. Also, it has, as I said before, for this artistic vision to it. And that can mean several different things. When I say it's 360, it's not always 360-degree as in realism. Sometimes it is in a black box, on a stage with light, and it's very technique heavy, like dramatic techniques, like monologues and time skips and the people directing the action, things that have where there's a certain area where you go to play other stories that are outside of the time frame of the current game and so on, things like that. There's very many different kinds of techniques that people use, and when we speak about artistic, that's sometimes what people think of, this technique heavy stuff, but we also a lot of times have artistic goals, even if it's not very dramatic technique heavy, but more on the realistic side. But it is more into like, so instead of being pulpy, or even if it is pulpy, it's artistically pulpy, rather than like kind of not so deeply engaged on a creative level in that sense, the artistic side of it. And there's a lot of people who are very hardcore artists who do this stuff. and who work with it and who live with this as their thing. This is a little quote from one of the scholars of Nordic LARP, that anything that is Nordic LARP, if it's influenced by the tradition of Nordic LARPs, basically. It's not, there's a really weird definition per se, but we don't have a clearer definition at this point because it is that. It's a movement, it's not geographically anymore defined anymore. So edu-LARPing, back to educational LARPing or participatory dramas. So when I speak about participatory drama, it is this element of people being part of deciding what happens. It's all improvised. It is all without an audience. It's not a consumer drama where I'm looking at this. This is a drama where every participant is part of creating it, which is how we are looking also. It becomes almost revolutionary in a place where we are learning, where we are in a culture where we are learning to be consumers of media rather than participants in media. Now, just like we're consumers of economy and not participants in a participatory economy, for instance. The whole idea with an educational LARP is that we learn through character in a narrative structure, in a story, right? And it is really a particular form of theater and education. We did not come up with all this, although the specific form and techniques we use are something we came up with, and they came from us. But there are other people who do this already. Sometimes it's called drama pedagogics, sometimes it's called theater and education. But this kind originates in the Nordic LARP culture, and that's why we call it edu-LARP rather than theater and education, although it has very many touching points here where you learn in character. So state of the art, this is kind of where we were at a few years ago. I have not been doing this the last 5 years, so there might be some stuff that I'm missing now, but this is the stuff that we do. So Østerskov is a school in Denmark where the students in junior high it's a boarding school. They go there and they learn everything in character. They have a brief Monday morning, then they are in character during school hours throughout the whole week, doing a particular scenario where they learn all the subjects, doing this in character, and then they go out, have a debrief Friday afternoon. I worked at that school and it's really cool, and I would love to talk the whole hour about it, but we're not talking about that. The same is Liveverkstad, and they go into schools and they do these educational games. A lot of it is history, politics, gender roles, social studies, different aspects of it. Like United Nations role plays that has been happening since the mid-80s. They do those kind of things and they develop them so that they have more game elements, which means that they can have more statistics and work with how much economy you have in a country and so on. But they also do this on gender roles, set discussions and things to work. The Liveverkstad goes into things. Museum pedagogics do this also, where you get to be part of a historic event. You get to dress up as one of the historic people and experience whatever the museum is covering. As I said, United Nations and refugee role-playing games where people get to experience what it is like to be a refugee, and how you do that with students so that they get an appreciation of what it is like to leave your home country and not understand the language and try to work through a bureaucracy and so on. The UN is basically model UN, it's usually called, where you're different countries and you get to try out being in the assembly. That's done on the low down to the little school in a classroom, and all the way up to where several people meet from different schools and do this really thoroughly with a whole school and so on, a whole actual assembly and so There is also a security personnel simulation training that does this kind of stuff, basically what the military does, or what I see the EMT street medics does. This is a very common simulation method, but although edu-LARPing per se is usually more in character and not yourself, which is the difference between a simulation and a role play. In Norway, there is a group called Fantasiforbundet, which is getting money from the Norwegian government for aid money, basically, to train civic society in Belarus and Palestine, where they work with refugees or they work with democracy movements, or both, to train the civic society by coming together and playing games and training different things. And they have been playing under the dictatorship in Belarus, for instance. They've been playing different games, usually set in historic in World War II and things like that, to discuss democracy in a dictatorship under the radar. So this is happening right now, and several of my friends there from Belarus have also been in contact with me this summer when they were when all the upheaval was happening there, and it's interesting that they've already built the framework using these techniques. And Rollespelsakademin is basically an annual education for people who want to do this and want to learn how to do it. They have like a week-long academy they do. Okay, that I'm gonna give you 3 minutes now in breakout rooms to just talk real quick about whether you've heard anything like this before.
All right, I'm opening the rooms.
If Ruthie is ready.
Yep, I'm ready, opening the rooms.
Point. And this is the logo of the game, if you're wondering, which is the Rolling Anarchy logo of the Levelers, which is our version of it. But the Levelers is a music band from Ireland. So the game was called 2027, Life After Capitalism. It was set in a utopian future, but with diminishing resources. Like we're thinking about what can our real reality future look like, but where we have a good society. Now, it's not a post-apocalypse, so it's not like, oh, everything fell apart and now we're struggling to survive. It's set in a libertarian socialist world where we respect nature's boundaries. Very simply, we try to share what we have and create a regenerative economy and a regenerative democratic political system and an economic system, and a regenerative way of living on the land, so that the land don't get broken down, but actually get better and better, more fertile, less prone to catastrophes. So we were trying to use dramatic drama, positive drama, and try to solve conflict constructively. Now we have to tell people to do that because drama implies conflict. And when people do these games, they want to create conflict because that's the juice. That's where the game really gets. So we have this conflict, and we have this relationship that is strained. If it's just like, oh, we have a good relationship, it's not. It doesn't really make fun drama. So when we say this is a utopian game, you have to try to do it positively. There will be conflict, and there should be conflict, but you should try to solve them constructively, because that's what we want you to practice doing, so that you don't practice all the negative ways of society, but the positive ways of society. Now, the setting there was three main settings, three settings. The main setting, which was a learning community in central Sweden, was based around the ideas of participatory economy, permaculture, and libertarian socialism. The side settings was refugees from a collapsed Finland, which there was a post-apocalypse in. There were the Finland had all gone tribal, or not tribal, a warlord, and refugees from Denmark, which have gone all fascist, and this. So their story was more about fleeing, surviving, and freedom fighting, basically. These settings do come together into those side settings come into the main setting as the game goes on. And look, there's me when I was young and well dressed. So the locations were, and this is the real world locations. Magazine, autonomous culture house that exists it's primarily youth driven, as it says here, which exists in this old warehouse in Nyköping, where these kids they were occupying they were occupying that different building until the city has said, okay, you can have this old building to have a culture house in, and here's money because you're in Sweden and you're doing culture. So they're running this culture house with like all sorts of cool things in it, bike shops and all sorts of fun things that are happening. The other settings, the other locations we used were in Gärdet, which is an eco village, or they call it eco unit, which on this farm about an hour away out in the sticks from this city, and the Teater Kö, which is a theater where there are black boxes, and these just studios which is in another city. So we were in like 3 different locations where we were actually busing people between, and we had them play their characters in their buses too, because those were trips for the characters too, in different ways. I'll get into that a little bit later, but these are the 3 locations that you need to know about. So the characters had, the way we created characters, but we had 6 different 6 different subcultures, which came from the radical left, that you chose a subculture because it would be easier for you to be able to create, like just plop into an archetype, basically. And these were the syndicalists, which is the working class unionists, the radicals, punks and rioters, holists, health and spiritually minded people, the holistic people, intellectuals, the middle class thinkers, radical thinkers, but maybe more conservative in their life choices, hackers, the radical cyber activists, scavengers, the primitivist tribalists, anarchist kind of people. Then we asked people to think about their characters on scales. The 4 scales we chose was pacifism and militarism. What's your scale? How pacifist versus militarist are you? Like 1 to 5 or whatever. Think about that. Pragmatism versus ideals. How pragmatic and how much idealistic are your character? Then private versus public. How private are you? How much do you want to privacy? How much are you just a very, what do you call that? Public person. You think you don't mind your people knowing everything. And then the last one is individual versus collective. What's the individual versus the collective? Where do you put your individual rights and freedoms versus the collective sharing? What's that scale? Not to say that these are actually necessarily all of them opposites, but it was an easy way for people to plug into character to create. take a subculture, make these traits approximately how your character should think about things, and then you have like a basic archetype that you can start working with. That can be ranging over a lot of different stories with these archetypes in them. Okay, let's see. So we ended up having these different groups that came together. So we have these characters, and then we have these groups. So the characters, the groups are not the same as the subcultures. There's people from different subcultures in these groups. Here's some, these are the examples. These are all of them. I'm not going to go through all of them, but it's basically like a polyamorous extended family, the info point, the people who are around like the information sharing in this magazine, which is the learning community, or like the bike shop where they discuss where the inflection point between theory and practice, for instance, for as a few examples. And then, so these are the groups at Magasinet, this educational unit, school, basically. And these are the groups from elsewhere, like the workers from the south, the people gone through this. Is the group of workers that have been traveling, and refugees that were workers together and came together and moved up. Then the tribe, or also known as scavengers from the south, which is these people who are more the homeless people who were trying to get away from the fascist world. So we have all the more lower class, if you want, and then the worker class group that came out of the fascist south. For everybody who don't know, that Denmark is south central Sweden. And then the immigrants from the east, which are primarily from Finland, but there was also an Estonian woman who was partaking in the game, and so her character was from Estonia. But so these were from Finland, and these are the people. They're also like a refugee group that were running away from collapse, because it's much more like warlord kind of anarchy in our setting there. So these kind of give you a sense of the kind of groups that we did, that we put people into, so that they came with different stories and had relationships together. So you come from a subculture and traits, then you get put into a group, and then between groups and individuals, we create relationships. So in two different groups, there might be like, oh, your ex is in another group, but you have this, or your best friend is in another group, but you're getting separated because you're now working on different things, and that's part of your story, and things like that, or your enemy, or whatever. So that kind of thing. These networks of story-related material is set up so that people. You remember I told you it's all improvised, so you have to have like hooks into stories, because it's not going to be a simple thing you do all together. This is 50 people, 60 people who participated in this particular game. Some games are like thousands of people. I think there's 8,000 people in some German games. I've only organized some for 500, 450 people is the biggest I have. Some games are 3 people. You play 3 people and you just do it because it's this little group. So you have an enormous span, and you have different techniques you use for those different settings, of course. But this is how we created those stories together. The characters from the subcultures, and which then they can connect with other people in the subcultures, and the traits, the groups, and the relationships within the groups and between the groups. And that creates like this story world where you can go in and start following these dramatic threads and play on them or not. You don't have to. Okay. Part of those groups I was talking about, I should probably mention, is that they have different approach to some certain different things in the real world. Like, are they how radical are they when it comes to family, or how do they organize when it comes to family, when it comes to economy, when it comes to work, when it comes to culture? How do they organize those things? How do they think about them? How do they apply them? That means you can tap into those kind of subcultures very practically. Also, like, how do they dress? Yeah. Okay, so here's the dramatic arc. This is, you can stare on it while I drink and think about that, because that's a bit complicated. I'm not sure you can read everything. Are you able to see my cursor when I pull it over here so I can use it to show you? My mouse cursor, can you see it? Good. So here, if you see this whole column or row here, this whole row is Magasinet, the first one. That's the first location. The second location is Änggärdet, which is the farm. The third location is the theater studios at Teaterkö. When you see this is day 1, day 2, day 3, and day 4 are the game, are the columns in it. So what we did, just to understand the color coding through, is this first day all the way up to the morning of the second day was basically workshops and black box scenes. It was not the 360-degree game. We were trying to create the 15 years leading up to the now of the game. And the dinner here at 1800 is when we go into playtime, so to speak, where everybody starts playing their characters full time in the world as it is. And here's also where the first wave of immigrants come. This is again Magasinet. And then we did an off-game breakfast where we did not what I meant to do, where we did a time jump and a little update, and people get to like talk in their groups to say what's the story going to be the next act, and so on, because we divided it into acts so that way people have something to hook the story on. Whereas here we started out with workshops, and then we do the traumatic experiences. So the trauma of transition, I call it, right? The one is the building the utopia in the Magasinet, but in the Teaterkö, it's all the refugee stuff that they experienced. And what we then did is after doing those workshops with the refugees, we took them to a farm, which represented actually 2 different farms at the same time. One was a farm where people were from the south, where it was in fascist Denmark. They had to pull out potatoes and work hard and experience like this very oppressive culture. And at the same time, the Finnish people were being like, it wasn't fascist there, that was a warlord instead. But we managed to like put them in together by telling them, don't play up against those things that are not congruent with your story. Play within your own story. And if you meet someone who's not in your story, don't play up the not in each other's story part. Just focus on what actually in the story. And then from there, the Finns came to the main Magasinet, and the Danish people went back down and played for another full day of resistance, basically, where they resist the fascists in the south, which is what the rest of this day 2 is, all this. And then what we did after breakfast for the Magasinet people, they went to the same farm, but now the farm is this eco farm that they're learning about permaculture in, and we're building regenerative stuff on the same farm, which also means that we help the farm build new garden beds while we're playing this. And then from there, people had those who wanted to go to Denmark and help out, they would leave and go join as resistance fighters because they wanted to go help their neighbors fight the fascists. They get to go back down there and go back to the theater studios and do that, whereas most of us went back and did the rest of that day's game, where we are preparing for these immigrants that we're gonna come here, and we know that we've been told by the government that there's gonna be immigrants who come. Not the government, the people who are responsible for immigrants. And we've said like, okay, we've had a vote saying, yes, we will accept them and help them get integrated into our participatory economy, or PAR-econ. And so when the second wave of immigrants come, all the people that have been in the theater studios, when they come on the evening of the second, we have the second wave. And some of those are people who we knew already because they were her friends who went there as freedom fighters too. And then, so there starts to have all these veteran conversations and doing work on like that, the kind of trauma that you will experience going through this kind of thing. Okay, and from there, the last 2 days, there's some workshop stops where we do time jumps and things, but the last two days is basically jumping a year ahead and then jump to like first a few months and then a year ahead till graduation. And then we have the story develop, all the different individual storylines, let them develop, have breaks where they can discuss the development and then go in and play that development again until we basically have a graduation ritual where people are now have to look into the future and they have to think about what they want to do from after here, which we also feel like gives people an idea of what do they actually want to do in the real life too, not just the characters, because it kind of mirrors like what we want to do in the future. You have to do, you've experienced what it can be now, you've experienced what it might need, what you now might need to learn to go get to that future, and then we do like a ritual with that, and then we do de-rolling and go through the emotional things that came up, and then have an after party and like out of character and say, yay, we did this, and then people go home the day after because it's late. So there. Whew. Okay, that was a lot, but now I'm going to ask you all to go into 3 minutes and talk to the people in breakout rooms again. And so how can you, if you have a dramatic or pedagogic background, how can you connect what you've done before with what I just water hosed at you? How can you think about this being applicable to things you do in your world? Okay, Ruthie, take it away.
All right, I am opening the rooms. Here we go. Okay.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. So now we're going to look a little bit on techniques and methods. How do we do this? I want to point out that what I spoke about with groups and characters and those things, and the dramaturgy I did when workshops and cutting into the story and time jumps, all these things are certain different kinds of techniques that we use, dramatic techniques. Those are not always used. There's very many different games. The way we created our groups and our characters and the traits and stuff, those are not always used. That was one choice that we made, a design choice we made, because we thought that would be the better option for us. Also separating into different locations like that, and then trucking people in between and having those journeys be part of the game doesn't happen a lot either. Usually it's one game, one space. The dramatic unity of the Poetics of Aristotle is usually kept intact. You know, you're in one place with it during the time you're actually there, and the characters that are there, there's few characters that are there, rather than like this dispersed way of telling narratives, which you can do, which we chose to do here, which is more storytelling based. It's epic in nature rather than dramatic in a sense. Okay, less about that and more about what we do with LARP specifically. So, what's the anatomy of the scenario? Usually, we do an introduction and brief, then we do the scenario runtime, and then we do a debrief and post-game work. In the introduction, usually it's creating characters if they don't already come in created, but people done it beforehand in their people can spend a year preparing or 2 months preparing. Sometimes it's a 1 hour workshop. And that introduction and briefing can be online, it can be in person, and all sorts of, like, it can be done with letters sent back and forward. It can be done over phone and so on. But a lot of times there's a lot of reading to do to understand the world, to understand the history of what you're doing, the scenario and so on. Scenario runtime, you play the game, whether you break it up and you have workshops in the middle or not. And then debriefing afterwards, we usually go through the emotional impact or what you just experienced. Sometimes we debrief the educational content that you just experienced, depending on how we do that. Yes, and post-game work, sometimes that debrief is a few-hour workshop. Sometimes that is people writing on a forum. Yeah, you should have forums or some way of communicating together. Sometimes it's people, writing on those forums for their whole character stories and get into it to like debrief what sometimes is referred to as post-escapism trauma. Which is basically when you lost that world, those relationships, that person you lose that once you're not in that world anymore. And you've had strong emotional connections that were not real. And so there is not a trauma per se, but there is definitely a sadness and a sorrow sometimes. And people go through different ways of doing that, physical workshop stuff, talking about emotions, changing themselves. There's games about gender where people are like, where they deconstructed genders and reconstructed them in a sci-fi world, for instance. And everybody who lived there went through that game. I don't think anybody ended up having their heteronormative relationship the way it was as they went in after that. Most people just broke up with the people, started being more polyamorous, started being more androgynous, because they found like, oh, I'm this little bit too. I'm not just this. And they found that the way that game impacted them changed the way they looked at relationships and gender. And so sometimes, as I said, we do a cyclical thing where you do runtime, rebrief, runtime, which is basically the little workshop breaks in the middle. Okay, this is strong. Some people, it's like, it's getting towards, this stuff gets towards brainwashing in some ways if you're not doing it right. That's why we try to do it right. And we try to do it with debriefs and work through, have people have buddies that they can call in 2 weeks later when they're like crying their eyes out because their love of their life, which was a made up person, is not in their lives anymore. Not that happens super often, but a lot of times you want to talk to people and things about these things because you experience them for days or hours at least. Okay, so LARP and other teaching. Sometimes we use the game as a summary of the teachings. You learn about Rome, then you play a game in the Senate. Sometimes you do a game as an introduction. You do a sci-fi game about gender where you don't know it's gender you're talking about, and then you, after that, discuss gender roles in your classroom. And sometimes the game is the whole learning structure itself. All the learning is contained in the game with its brief and debrief. If that's a way of thinking about how to relate it to teaching. So there's a difference between sandbox and railroad. These are game terms. So sandbox is a sandbox. You can sit down in your sandbox and you play. We do whatever you want. You do a little bit of the building, a little bit of the driving the truck, and so on. And it's the same, but in obviously a different kind. But it's an open-ended world where you can do whatever you want. It's more used for active and driven students. Whereas a railroading it is where you're going through this story that we've set out. Either it's a set story or it's maybe even a set local, like a set track you're walking in the forest or something like that. It's something you're actually following a trail, which is better for passive and unengaged students. We had at 2027 we used both. You could see that when I went through the dramatic arc, there was both some railroaded parts and then some more open-ended. Oh, we prepare. We have 2 days where you're just preparing for the immigrants. That's all you need to know that you're going to be doing. So competition and cooperation. I did say that cooperation is very important in Nordic LARP, but competition exists too. Now the competition can be that you compete against each other or the system. I was trying to find a recording that they did. They did a radio-free Mälardalen, which is the area where they were recording in English, and they were sending these radio signals, pirating it into the fascist Denmark in the story. And I was going to play that when you came in, but I couldn't find it, unfortunately. But that would be where the students are having a conflict, but they're fighting against the system, the game system, not the political system, but the game system. In this case, the game system would be the fascists, right? Whereas they don't fight each other, which was what we wanted to try to avoid, so that they would have more like conflict resolution from a creative side there, whereas some conflicts might not be able to be constructive and positive. They need to be combative, like when fascists try to kill you or your friends. And again, the corporate, but that competition can be in many ways between characters or between players and between player and a group. So, and cooperation, on the other hand, is when you cooperate in telling the story or solving tasks within the story. Either those. You can cooperate, tell a story where my character loses, but I'm cooperating still. Okay. So embodied world, as you understand, they learn the teaching happens through these embodied worlds, where they go into a real world, where they're experiencing the real world, and with that, they experience embodiment of the subject matter. It makes things real. People got to be a weekend being 15 years being anarchists, hence the name of this program spot, is that they were anarchists for those 15 years. They got to feel what it was like to be in a libertarian socialist world with participatory economy. They got to feel what it meant to be in that utopia, and it became real. We also made like participatory economy, the structure of how that worked. Like does that actually practically work? They had to experience that, or they got to experience that through their work or their experience at the learning unit, the school. So that way we made it real for them, and that's part of why we do use these methods. So role playing, teaching and learning through role play, learning soft values and doing identity work through taking on characters. It's alibis. You get an alibi to do things you wouldn't do otherwise by taking on a character, and you rehearse for life that way by doing that. If that's rehearsed for revolution, or if that's rehearsed for yes, interactions with your partner, that's part of what you do when you teach and learn through role play, because of these soft values and the identity work you do. So it's really good as empathy training and perspective shifts, so that you can see in a different way, like for being refugees or something like that. Okay, I'm not going to take this beehive. I'm going to instead ask if you have any questions that I can ask the last 2 minutes here now. Ruthie, do you have anything you can curate to me to say?
You didn't have a whole lot of questions, but you did have one here. Well, actually, you did have a couple more.
So I'll say something that I think. So this game was in Sweden. I don't make them anymore, really. I'm working with cooperative development right now instead, making co-ops. But these exist all over the US too, by the way. If you Google Nordic LARP, they exist all over Europe. They exist all over the US. Some in the South America, some in Israel and Palestine and North Africa. I don't know about the East Asia. And I'm speaking about Nordic LARP now. That doesn't mean you'll get political LARPs like this, but you'll get other experiences like this. They're funded in different ways. Some are really expensive because people have to be paid to do the work. Some are funded by governments, arts funding or youth funding or aid funding for poor countries. So that's why we got funded by a youth culture grant to do this game in particular. So that's answering a couple of the questions I saw myself. Is there anything else, Ruthie?
Nope, I think actually you have covered all the questions, and we are right at time. Wait, something else came in. Oh, that was thank you face person with musical note that has left some really wonderful resources in the chat.
Good. I'm gonna right now drop you all a file that is basically these what you just saw here. If I can find the file on my computer. In the chat, there will now be a PDF. I'm sending it. Hopefully it'll reach you before we end.
I will also be uploading that.
Slides.
Yeah, I'll also upload that the slideshow to the website so that folks can access that too. I'll be sending out recordings and how to access materials once the conference is over next week.
Yeah, and if you want it, I have my email here, and it will be in there. You can always send me emails if you're interested, and I'll do my best to answer them. And there is conferences about this both in the US and in Europe happening every year, where you can learn a lot more and partake in what they're doing if you want to. And it's fantastic experiences.